All right, we're hitting record. Thank you. Okay, well, welcome, as we were saying, to this national community of practice. And we are here to bring together leaders from across the US and around, around current and emerging food system plan efforts to share knowledge and strengthen local and regional food systems. And my name is Colleen Matz, and I'm Assistant Director for Strategy at the Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems, and just joining in supporting Lindsay Scalera, who has been leading this fine work over numerous years, building it up to where it is today. And we're happy to have guests with us today from Iowa, but Lindsay, I'll give you a minute to introduce yourself first.
Hey there, thank you, Colleen. I am Lindsay Scalera. I'm the Director of Policy, Policy and Leadership Education Programs at the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems and the Assistant Director of Policy. And my role here, one of my roles here is sort of stewarding our Michigan Good Food Charter, both the process to update it and now that we're in the implementation phase. So I'm very, very excited to hear more from our guests today because it we have an echo. It relates directly to the stages that we're in right now in Michigan and implementing our plan. So thanks, Colleen. I will turn it back over to you.
Sure. And as you know, we have a session today focused on the plan out of Iowa called Setting the Table for All Iowans, and specifically on their evaluation and evaluating for funders, policymakers, and internal partners. So I'll ask the team who's joining us today as guest speakers to introduce themselves. Tommy, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure thing. My name's Tommy Hexter, and I'm the executive director for the Iowa Food System Coalition. Previously, I grew up on a farm, actually in Central Virginia, so I'm an Iowa transplant. And then I ran a food hub in Grinnell, Iowa from 2020 to 2025. And I was the policy director of Iowa Farmers Union from 2022 to 2025 before becoming the director of the coalition. So I really have deep interest in advocacy and building markets for local food in Iowa. And I'll pass it over to Mallory and then Arlene.
Hey everyone, I'm Mallory DeVries, also with the Iowa Food System Coalition. I'm the communications director. I'm also a farmer. I pasture-raised poultry on my tiny farm in Northeast Iowa, and I have a background in web development and graphic design. So I kind of have a wide range and a big lens for the local food system here in Iowa. Wear a lot of different hats. Arlene, I'll take it over to you.
Hi, I'm Arlene Enderton. I work for Iowa State University Extension and Outreach on the Farm Food and Enterprise Development team. And I'm an evaluator, and I live also in Northeast Iowa, maybe 45 minutes from where Mallory's at.
Great, thank you all. And thanks for joining us today to share about your good work and evaluation. We did want to take a minute to have the people who have joined us on the call as listeners and participants to introduce themselves too, just so we have a sense and our speakers have a sense of who's here today. So if you could drop your name and affiliation and location into the chat at the very least. Anybody have a good connecting prompt that we should add in there too?
We did one last week for our local food council network, which was what type of ice cream? What ice cream flavor are you today? Like right now, currently?
Oh, all right.
Ice cream flavor.
All right. So please add in your ice cream flavor for the day. I think I'm pistachio today. I don't know why.
I picked pistachio last week, but it's not. I think I'm I don't know. What's like an Italian ice today? Not quite ice cream.
Ever since I tried butter brickle ice cream in Omaha, I've always been butter brickle since then, I think.
I have never had that.
Oh, definitely try it. It's an Omaha classic.
All right, next time I'm in Nebraska.
All right, thank you all for adding in. your names and good to know where you're coming from and what ice cream you're feeling today. We do have a spring day here in Lansing area, Michigan. We're both on campus today, and spring is finally springing, but we're having some flooding too, so it's a time. All right, thank y'all. As those introductions are coming in, we'll keep on moving here, but we can keep monitoring those. So we are going to just note for now that we'll have a good solid presentation from our friends in Iowa. They're not all located in Iowa today at the moment, but they'll be sharing about their Iowa plan. And we'd ask that you keep questions for the Q&A portion. We do have time reserved for that. And we can use the Q&A box to do that, or the chat box.
Sorry,
Chat
I think
box.
I think the chat's a little easier for everyone because
Yeah, okay.
we'll go for the chat.
So we'll focus on the chat box. We'll come back to that when we get to it. But just letting you know that we'll have time for questions and definitely want to have some discussion and group synthesis of what we're hearing today. And we have some questions to try to get your responses on too, as it relates to this evaluation. So to start things off, we're going to do a quick grounding activity to give us more of a sense of who's here today and how we can lead the conversation from here. So Lindsay's going to take us through a little grounding activity.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the grounding activity is a very simple poll, which I'm going to launch right now. But so I'm just going to let you know what the questions are real quick. So we're just asking, we've asked this in previous questions, but to give us a sense of who's here now, what's the status of your statewide or regional food system plan? The second question is then for those who have plans or plans in development, what is the status of the coalition to support that food system plan, if you have a coalition of some sort? And then the third question is about, so for those with plans or plans in development, what are you currently planning to evaluate? And then we have a couple of options there that you can pick as many as you want. So I'm going to hit launch on that. We'll give folks a moment to answer, and then we'll share what everyone says. And I see some love for Maine in the chat. I love it. That's one state I have not been to yet. Got to put it on my list. We still have a couple of answers coming in. All right, looks like we have pretty much everybody. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll and we'll share the results. So let's just take a quick look. Hopefully you can see this yourself. So for status of the plan, we've got a couple folks or one person on here who does not have a plan or no plans in place. Got a couple folks who there's some interest in a plan, but there's not a plan yet. About 6 people with plans of development, 7 with an active plan, a couple folks with an update to their plan in progress, and then one person with an inactive plan. Understandable. So then for those who have plans or plans in development, do we have coalition yet around supporting that plan? So there's about 5 folks who said of the 18 people who answered, no official coalition. Some folks have a coalition in development. Some folks are reviving or re-energizing a previous coalition, and then there's a good number of us that have an active coalition. I'm really glad we asked that reviving and re-energizing question, because I think in Michigan we're somewhere between active and reviving because we're making some changes. That's great. So I was like, how would I answer that question? For the third one, what are we currently planning to evaluate? So some folks are evaluating the coalition itself. That's super interesting. The goals of the plan is by far the top choice in there. Output tracking, those two make a lot of sense. We've got some other, and we've got a good number of people who are unsure of what they're planning to track. And I feel everybody on all those things. We went through quite a bit to try to figure out how to track our updated plan. So with no further ado, I think the next thing is to turn it over to our guests. And I'm hoping that with our presentation today and what we're learning today, those folks who feel more unsure will maybe feel more sure. We'll find out. All right. So if that we did have a couple folks join us, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Oh, yep, Colleen made a note. And we're just putting what's your ice cream flavor for the day, if you like to share. All right. And so with that, I will turn it over to Arlene, Mallory, and Tommy. I'm going to spotlight you all, and I will pull up your slides in just a moment.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Lindsay. And yeah, I'll get us kicked off here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mallory and Arlene, who are the experts on this topic as it goes to Iowa, and they've been doing it a lot longer than I have since I've just been the director for 4 months. But I'll just start by giving us a little introduction of what the Iowa Food System Coalition is. And really, I'll start with a book I've been reading recently because I always love sharing books, and I don't know if this is going to let you see it because my background's blurred. Let's see if I can do that. The book is called From What Is to What If: Unleashing the Power of Imagination to Create the Future We Want. And as you can see, we have a what if question on this first slide. And the question is, what if locally produced food was the norm rather than the exception in Iowa? And that is really at the heart of what we are trying to figure out as the Iowa Food System Coalition. And I think that if you're on this call, you are probably asking the very same question in your state as well. And that's kind of what unites us all over the country in this cause is how can we produce more of the food that we're consuming locally, state level, or regional. And so I just want to start off by saying we're really excited to be doing work in our state, but we also want to work with you all at a multi-state level and collaborate with you. And so don't be surprised if you see me emailing you after this call, or if you want to reach out to me, please do, because we're always happy to talk between states. I think the more states can work together, the more we can learn and create a block of states working together. So we can go ahead to the next slide here. I think we already did introductions, but you can at least look at our fun headshots. Mallory or Arlene, do you have anything you want to add to your introductions?
I need a new headshot. That's it.
I think it's great. Okay, we'll go ahead to the next one. The Iowa Food System Coalition, we are really lucky in Iowa to have a backbone organization that is kind of our collaborative space for all food system organizations in Iowa to work together. And so we were founded in 2022 by some folks who have been working on food systems for decades in the state. And the vision for the Iowa Food System Coalition is that we want a food system that cultivates health, justice, and sustainability for all people, communities, and the environment. And so we partner with farm organizations, government agencies, universities, public health organizations, food banks and pantries, public schools, land banks and land trusts, and more. So we really are trying to create an open tent for anyone who wants to work on food system. We're always welcoming in new partners. And if you can go to the next slide. What we work on with those partners is our plan, which is setting the table for all Iowans. And this plan was crafted with input from hundreds of Iowans at the beginning of the coalition. And it was launched in 2024. And this is a 10-year plan. And it's basically a guide for all of our organizations as they collaborate that has actionable strategies for the organizations to work together rather than just working on their own. And we have a saying in Iowa, it's a saying everywhere. If you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And that's really what this plan represents, is organizations being able to work together to grow our food system. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the plan is broken down into 9 priority areas. And those priority areas represent basically every angle that we could think of people coming to the food system from. And we had to do some lumping together, but generally speaking, these are the broad swaths that professionals and interested consumers will come at the food system from. So everything from the environment to labor to nutrition to land access and infrastructure and procurement. And then we have 2 kind of catch-all priority areas, and that's communication and education and local food policy. And so those 2 priority teams, they kind of receive all of the information on what the 7 other teams are working on, and then they present it out to the public through our policy advocacy. So, we do collective advocacy at the Capitol, and through our collective communications, our social media, our website, and our newsletter, as well as our podcast, that kind of collaborates on all those other teams as well. So that's kind of the structure of the coalition. And for the topic of today, we can go to the next slide. What I mentioned there is that each of these teams is measuring up against or working towards, I guess is a better way to put it, the strategies that are outlined in the plan. And so the strategies, contain actions, and then those actions are associated with expected outcomes. And so each of these teams has multiple strategies and a lot of different outcomes that we're tracking that Arlene helped them get set up a few years ago. So you'll hear more about that later. But the last thing I want to say is that, and then I'll turn it over to Mallory and Arlene for the rest of the session, is that the progress that we've been able to make has been really meaningful. Through the coordination of these teams, we've been able to accomplish some great legislative wins, including getting an LFPA and LFS program started at our state level here in Iowa. It's called the Choose Iowa Purchasing Program. And just a fun side note, schools were in the state program to start, and then they were cut last year from the state program, and then they were added back into the budget this year. And so that was mostly because our folks made a big stink when the schools were removed from that program last year. And so we're really hopeful that schools will continue being part of that. And then the other thing is we've been able to leverage a lot of public and private resources through the plan and the kind of actions and outcomes we're measuring. So those are some of the major areas that tracking helps with. And we're going to go into more detail about the policy benefits, the funding benefits, and the communications benefits of evaluating a plan. So with that, I'll turn it over to the next slide here. And unfortunately, I am at another event today, and so I'm going to have to hop off. But Mallory and Arlene are going to take it from here, and they are the experts. And I really wish I could stay, and I look forward to watching the recording after the session. So thanks for having me, everybody.
Right. Bye, Tommy. Thanks for coming in. I know that he had to kind of squeeze us in since he's at another event right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and go on to the next slide here. So as Tommy was mentioning, the 9 priority chapters in our plan each contains strategies, actions, and outcomes. And so that plan was released in 2024, and then our next step in terms of evaluation was to take those outcomes that were listed in the plan and turn them into an evaluation plan. So the issue that we have is that we have 9 priority areas, and in the plan, they could have anywhere from 15 to 20 or even 30 outcomes listed. And it's just not practical nor meaningful to measure that many outcomes. And so we needed to set up a process for identifying which of those outcomes are we actually going to measure, since we're not going to measure all of them. So here at the bottom of the screen in this orange box, it shows kind of the process that I had originally laid out of how we're going to go about turning those outcomes into an evaluation plan. So this is what I originally proposed, and it didn't actually go exactly as I had proposed, but I'm going to go through and kind of give you some commentary on on how we went about doing this. So at the beginning of 2024, we had a meeting where all of the priority teams would be having kind of like a breakout session time. And we asked them to look through their their strategies, actions, and outcomes, and especially looking at those actions, decide who was going to do what and when were they going to do them. So this was part of getting these priority teams started, like what are we going to do first? But it led into the evaluation because certain activities needed to come before other activities. So it helped us to know what would we be measuring, because it doesn't make sense to be measuring outcomes that are associated with an activity that might be several years down the road. And then around the same time, we also asked the priority teams to look through their outcomes and start doing an initial kind of gut reaction in terms of which of their outcomes did they think they might want to measure. And they just color coded them like red, yellow, green in terms of which ones they thought they might want to measure. Shortly after that, I started meeting one-on-one with each of the priority teams, which I should say, not all 9 were actually really meeting at this time. But I met with those that were meeting. We started talking about their outcomes and talking about whether or not they were actually measurable, about whether there's already data out there that could be used to measure these outcomes. I also did a survey asking people to report to me what data they're already collecting for whatever programs they're running. That survey has an X over it in our orange box because it was a flop. Hardly anybody took it, so it wasn't really that useful. But then we did come out with kind of a final prioritization of which outcomes to measure. And then the next step, kind of looking in that orange box, the bottom right corner, we have the circle. Do we have access to the data that we would need to measure these priority outcomes? And if the answer was yes, then we thought we would be using some sort of sharing system, like online system, where we would be sharing data or plugging in our metrics. That has an X over it because we didn't actually end up doing that. Sorry, actually, I guess I see on your screen there are. Oh, there. Okay, there's the X. Sorry. So that we actually never did end up having an online portal where we would be sharing data. People just email me. So that's what we're doing. But then the other thing is, if going the other direction on that diagram, if we did not have access to data, then we would need to devise a data collection system and implement that system. And we've only did that actually for one of our indicators. And then we released our written evaluation plan in I don't know, might have been August or September of 2024. That's on our Food System Coalition website. So you guys can see our evaluation plan. And then pretty much as soon as we released that plan, then we started collecting data to get out our first report. Let's go on to our next slide. Okay, so I explained to you kind of what was going on kind of in the public view, or if you call it public, between me and these priority teams. But I've got this other slide here because I want to show you what was going on in my own mind while I was putting this outcomes evaluation plan together. So I used an online program called Miro where you can map stuff out. It's free. And we can share that link. You can actually look at the Miro board if you'd like to look at it. So basically, I use this Miro board to map out the outcomes that are in setting the table for all Iowans. And I realize that looking at the screen, you're not going to be able to read all of the fine print here, but you really just need to kind of understand the larger concept. So I'll just kind of walk you through it. So each color is a different priority area. And then each priority area is listed in an oval of that color. And then each square is an outcome that's in setting the table for all Iowans for that priority area. So I didn't actually list all of the outcomes on here. I just listed the ones that I thought we might actually measure. And And I should say a lot of the outcomes, and in air quotes, that were in the plan were actually outputs. And I chose not to put the outputs on here because that's not what I really wanted to focus on for this. So there are also some boxes on here that are outlined in purple. Those are 5 overarching goals that are listed in setting the table for all Iowans. So I added those in, and then you can see that there's a bunch of curved lines on here. So the bright pink curved lines are connecting outcomes that are very similar to one another. And then the purple lines are connecting from outcomes or even priority areas to those 5 overarching goals. So for example, if you look at the overarching goal that's pretty close to the middle, it's outlined in purple. That one is called, or the goal that reads, establish institutional buying of local foods to support farms and businesses to bring better access to healthy food through schools, grocers, and more. So after I completed this exercise, I decided to use most of those overarching goals that are in the purple boxes as outcomes in our evaluation plan, so that outcome that I just read to you became outcome number 4 in our evaluation plan. Okay, so this is a look into what was going on in my brain, and now let's go on to the next slide so you can kind of see the next thing that I did. Mallory could put a link for this one into the chat as well if you want to see the next iteration of this map. If you want to see it on your own screen, I mean. So then in Miro, I took that same map that I just showed you. I removed any outcomes that didn't have any lines connecting to them, because my assumption was that if there's only one priority team that cares about that outcome, or or only one priority team that outcome really is relevant to, that would be a lower priority to me to measure than if it was something shared by several priority teams. So in this diagram, I removed any of the squares that didn't have a line connecting to them. And then I just started moving things around so that things that were closely connected ideas would be next to each other on this map. And that helped me later when I was actually writing our evaluation plan, because I could kind of see which teams were connected, which outcomes. And then something I just want to point out to you is you might notice here kind of near the bottom center, in the kind of a coral oval, that's the policy team. That team has a lot of connections. You might notice that there's connections from that coral oval to yellow squares and green squares and orange squares. And there's also connections to 2 out of the 5 overarching goals that are in those purple outlined boxes. Okay, so now you saw what was going on in my own brain at the same time that I was going through this process with the teams. So let's go on to the next slide. So then I used the process I was going through with the teams, plus this map that I was kind of doing just on my own, to come up with our outcomes evaluation plan. That is something that's available for you to look at on our website if you want to see the whole plan. Mallory, there's a link to that in the notes there if you want to share it. So in our outcomes evaluation plan, I have outcomes, and then I have indicators, then I have measures, and then I have methods for measuring those measures. So if we go back to outcome number 4, which I had shared with you earlier, there's a screenshot of that on the page on the right there, and that is the indicator that we're using for that one. Just a sec. Oops, sorry. I'm gonna have to move this for a sec so I can see it. Okay, so the indicator that we're using for that one is an increased number of businesses and institutions procuring local food. And it's related to 3 strategies from 2 different priority areas. So I have like 2 little round icons there at the top that's related to those icons correspond to the 2 priority teams that this indicator is connected to. So that would be purchasing and procurement and labor equity. And then we have 3 measures, and our measures are the number of institutional and wholesale food hub customers by year, number of schools purchasing local foods each year, and we're getting those metrics from the Food Hub Managers Working Group. And then the dollars available from state and federal sources for school purchases of local food. And that's something I get primarily through document review. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so I just showed you how I kind of developed our outcomes evaluation, but there's more to our evaluation plan than just that. So this is a diagram showing kind of what our comprehensive evaluation plan looks like. So you'll see the outcomes evaluation that I just went over is on the right side. And then on the left, we have the formative evaluation and the process of evaluation. And I'm going to go over the formative evaluation now with moving on to the next slide. Okay, so first I should probably define what a formative evaluation is. So I see a formative evaluation as being a way of measuring whether you're putting things into place that would be like the foundation for your coalition. These are like foundational relational infrastructure, processes, that sort of thing that needs to be in place for you to be able to successfully work together to meet your goals. So some of the things that we would measure in the formative evaluation are listed in that chart there in the center of the screen. So it's things like the strength of your network, trust, belonging, whether you're upholding your mission, vision, and core values, whether people understand their roles and understand who is in what roles, expectations for people, having clear processes, people's satisfaction, and then looking at coalitions, the leadership and the power, how power is shared or not shared, that sort of thing. So those are all the kinds of things that we are measuring in our formative evaluation. On the left, that's kind of a diagram showing what I originally thought we would be doing each year for our formative evaluation. We've changed it slightly from what's in the diagram, and but not too much. So in 2024, we had a baseline coalition survey, and that diagram that's there in the center, those are some of the results from that first survey. It's just showing the average scores on like a Likert scale for a bunch of statements related to those 4 areas. And the formative evaluation reports are available on our website, so you can look at those reports and get a better idea of what we're measuring. Then in 2024, I originally thought we would do a survey and interviews. We ended up moving the interviews to 2025 and not doing a survey in 2025. And then in 2026, we've done another survey. I just closed that this week, so the results for that aren't available yet. So to give you an idea of what kinds of things we learned from these, from the formative evaluation. So in 2024, the survey was really very positive. It showed that trust was very high. People's satisfaction was high. We did see that the more involved a person was in the coalition, the higher they rated all of the different statements related to the coalition, except for the area of mission, vision, and values. And that one, it was flip-flopped. The more involved you were, the less you agreed with the statements in that section. And I think the reason for that was just that they have their mission, vision, and values are pretty lofty. And I think the more involved a person was, the more they understood just how much more could be done to reach those goals. In 2025, through our interviews, we saw that trust was still high. It was still quite positive. But there were 2 kind of big needs that were identified through that process, which is a nice thing about interviews. We could get into some more nuanced ideas. So we learned that we really needed as a coalition to do more to support the priority teams. Some were really flourishing, but some were really struggling. And some were not meeting at all. So it was hard for people to get involved, especially if their area of interest aligned with the priority team that was struggling. We also saw that there were a lot of partners who had originally committed to being a part of the coalition, but then after their initial commitment, never actually got involved. And just kind of by chance, actually, a lot of them ended up participating in the interviews, which that was really nice to hear from them because we weren't seeing them in our everyday meetings. So we learned more about what was keeping them from engaging, and we learned more about what they would like the coalition to do to help them engage. And we really learned that a lot of them needed opportunities to be involved that were like a little bit lower time commitment, or some just opportunities that fit their capacity a little bit better. And so now in 2026, now that Tommy is the executive director, he's really focusing on those two things, which is like helping those priority teams that have been struggling really get onto their feet, and better engaging those partners that are really well aligned and committed, but haven't found a good fit for participation. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So the final piece of our evaluation is what I call the process evaluation. I don't know if that's the best name for it, but essentially it's good record keeping. And so when it comes to record keeping, it's things about like the number of events that you've had, the number of people who have come, your reach, like when you're tabling at events or hosting events, the reach of the communications, the podcast, the social media, that sort of thing. And funds raised. And this piece of the evaluation is especially important for funders. They want to know that the money they're giving you is being spent to like get stuff done. And while outcomes are important to funders too, it seems to me like funders are often it's equally important for them just to know that like you did what you said you were going to do, and you have some numbers to show that you did it. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to spend probably quite a bit of time on this last slide. This is the last slide that I'll be presenting on. Okay, so this is a little bit of a gut check. So what would I do differently? Okay, so first of all, I would use a less collaborative process for creating the outcomes evaluation plan. So I know that sounds bad, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of background to help you understand this. Okay, so first of all, so I'm an evaluator, and I don't know if anyone else, I imagine other folks on this call are evaluators too. And as an evaluator, I found that I am hounding people all the time for stuff. Like, I need somebody to give me some data. Can you share this data set with me? Can you send me that report? Will you take my survey? Will you take my survey? Will you take my survey? Like, how many reminders do I need to send about the survey, you know? And so I'm hounding people, and I feel like I'm being pushy. And I've had this experience, not like all the time, but I've had it enough times to make me realize that other people think I'm a little pushy, because like I'll show up at a meeting or pop into an online meeting, and I'll see somebody get like a deer in the headlights look, and then they'll come off mute, or they'll come over to me and they'll be like, hey, I know I owe you, fill in the blank with whatever they owe me. I know that I have 5 emails from you waiting. I know that you texted me. I know, and so when I approach an evaluation, I try to like come into it of like, I'm not going to be the expert who comes in and tells you what to do. I'm going to try not to come off as the person of like, I'm going to evaluate your work, and hence I'm going to pick your work apart kind of evaluator, like my supervisor, the lady who taught me how to be an evaluator, her name is Corey Regendahl, who's actually, Rich is on the call today. Rich is the one who trained Corey to be an evaluator. Corey used to always tell me, like, we are friendly evaluators, and we need to let people know that we're friendly evaluators, because we can come off as intimidating, maybe. Okay, so I wanted to have a really collaborative process in putting our outcomes evaluation plan together, because I didn't want to be pushy. I didn't want people to feel like they were being forced to collect data or share data that they didn't want to, and I really wanted buy-in. But as I got into the process, I thought for most teams it would take 1 or 2 meetings for us to kind of hone in on which things they wanted to measure. But there was one team, it took 4 meetings. And even then we didn't really have like the greatest plan when we got to the end. And it became clear to me that it was overwhelming for people to go through all of their outcomes and decide which ones they thought should be measured. And it also became clear to me that like, a lot of them just didn't have like the baseline knowledge to be able to identify an outcome that would be a good one to measure. And at one point, this is when it really dawned on me. I was on a phone call with one of the priority team leaders talking about their metrics, and he said, "You're the evaluator. Aren't you supposed to just tell us like, can't you just tell us what we should be measuring?" And I thought, oh, yeah, I could. I could actually tell you what to measure. So I think it would have been better to come to them with, say, like, these are the 5 metrics that I think are the best candidates for being measured. And then I'd like you to help me narrow it down to 2. That would have been better. Plus, I already showed you the glimpse into my brain. I was already doing that in my own head. I already had in my mind what I thought the best indicators were because I put them on a mural board. So anyway, but some of our priority teams actually still haven't put their evaluation plans together because of that whole thing where I said some of them aren't really meeting yet. So I will have an opportunity to do this again and do it better. The next thing is I would have used a more collaborative process for the process evaluation. The process, that's the one that I said is good record keeping. And I had it in my mind when we started that I would be able, just through document review and through participating in meetings, to do this on my own. Because I actually have done this on my own in some other projects. But it turns out that this coalition is so broad, and there's so many meetings, and that I couldn't keep up with it all, and I couldn't know all the events that we were tabling at, and I couldn't assign for each event who's going to take attendance or that kind of thing. So I'm still figuring this out. Like last year I tried to create like a Google form for people to fill out after events to report, so just basic metrics about them. But even then I'm having a hard time getting, like, knowing who to assign this task to because I'm not at all the events. So I need to assign it to people, and I'm still struggling with this one. Okay, the last few things I'm going to go over before passing this to Mallory is that there are a couple things related to the evaluation that intersect with communication that I want to spend a little bit of time on. So in our evaluation plan, we have kind of 2 different types of outcomes that we're measuring, 2 different kinds of metrics. And it's becoming clear to, like, I've always kind of known this in my own head, but it's become clear to me that we need to be more explicit about it. And these 2 kinds of metrics, I would say, kind of fall into 2 buckets. The first bucket is what I would call like coalition impact. So these are outcomes that reflect direct action from our coalition. So these are things that we have a pretty direct influence over. The second one would be what we're calling kind of our statewide indicators. And these are things that are broader changes that are shaped by many different actors or many different factors. Now, I should mention that, like, some evaluators would choose not to measure that second bucket. Like, they would say, if the work that you're evaluating is only one of many influences and we can't really accurately parse out how much of that, the movement in that indicator is due to your coalition, we shouldn't measure it. Some evaluators would not go there. And actually, there's even an evaluator who's a participant in our coalition who is kind of falls into that camp. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I just want people to know what camp I'm kind of in. I would be in the camp that would say, like, yeah, we can and should measure outcomes, these kind of statewide indicators, even though we aren't the only influence, because these indicators are important, they matter. And I've also was pretty strongly influenced by the Kellogg Foundation. When I first became an evaluator, I was evaluating the Northeast Iowa Food and Fitness Coalition. And at least at that time, somebody at the Kellogg Foundation, or maybe it was in some of their documents, really, they had promoted this idea of contribution versus attribution, saying, like, you can measure something that you're contributing to, knowing that there are many other groups, organizations, policies, influences that are also contributing to the movement in this indicator. And then it really just comes down to how you communicate about it. You're not taking credit for other people's work. You're not communicating about it as if you think you're the only influence on that. And you're just explaining that you're contributing to this, and other people, other things are contributing as well. But moving forward, I have my current goal for our evaluation is to identify 2 metrics for each priority area. And it would be 1 metric for each of those areas. One that would be what's our coalition impact, what have we done to advance the area, and the other of how we're doing as a state. I'm still not sure how I'm going to make that work in our evaluation plan, though, because our current evaluation plan is one that's very integrated. So like a real mishmash. We're showing like this indicator is related to this priority and the priority area and this one and this one. Whereas the way I'm laying it out here of 2 metrics per priority team, it seems very bucketed. So I might have to do another Miro board to figure out how I'm going to kind of organize my thoughts around that for the next iteration of our evaluation plan. Okay, so I think it's time to pass this over to Mallory.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Arlene. And I had never actually looked at her Miro boards before we put this presentation together. And that is so helpful to literally see what's going on in your brain. And I've learned so much just working on this presentation with you. And I want to thank you, Arlene, for all this hard work and for being an evaluator that is willing to work on both of those buckets. It's been incredibly helpful in my work as the communications director and using data for storytelling, which is what we're going to get into next. So Arlene and our priority teams did all this really hard work getting all these numbers and all this data, and I get to do the fun stuff. I get to turn it into content. I get to tell stories and kind of have some fun with it. So we will talk a little bit about both of those buckets again, and how storytelling brings this data to life. And go to the next slide. Okay, so first is this, the coalition impact. Like every other organization, we have our annual impact report, or impact at a glance is what you're looking at here. This is for this year, or for 2025, just came out. But essentially, this is, what the coalition is doing, the levers that we can pull. So these kinds of things, how many times our teams are meeting, how many individuals are engaged, how many times we're touching base with legislators and decision makers, policymakers, what's our media reach and our communications impact, and then our resources produced. So those collective outputs also is something that we're starting to really get some traction on in our teams. So essentially, the numbers that we're tracking for the coalition help us to understand whether we're effectively mobilizing all these great partners that we have. It helps us to figure out, how to continue coordinating across the network. Helps us create those conditions for policy change. So instead of measuring outcomes here, we're really looking at how the coalition functions. So are we bringing the right people together? Are the partners and individuals actually showing up? And we track these year over year, kind of gives us a good idea of, some strategy changes that we need. So essentially, I feel like this is what we can do best to track our relationships that we have within the coalition and with legislators, and things like that. And next slide. This next one is when we talked about contribution versus attribution, this is where we walk that line. So this is something new that we've started doing. We create this statewide scorecard. So this is, these are indicators that are not outcomes that we can claim alone, but this is a view of the food system that we work within in the state of Iowa. So they reflect the entire ecosystem, the number of farmers, schools, nonprofits, and the policymakers, or that we can use to talk to policymakers. So they tell us essentially which way the system is moving. And we use this scorecard in a variety of ways. So first, it helps guide our strategy. So movement in those indicators up or down across the years help us to understand whether the system may be shifting, or stalled indicators maybe will tell us where more attention is needed. Ideally, we track, every single year we're watching these go up and down. Some of this is data that comes out every year. Some of this is census data, so we're looking at like every 5 years. Some of it's 2 or 3, and that, again, I'm really grateful for Arlene to keep track of all of that data that is not, just consistent, but kind of runs on its own schedule. The second way that we use this scorecard is for a communication and engagement tool. So we share these indicators, and these, we literally print these out, give them to legislators. We incorporate all this data into our advocacy campaigns, into storytelling. So we use them year round. And that's, the best way that we have found to use data is within storytelling. And this year every single year, we have a local food policy summit, and that is in December, about a month before the legislative session begins in Iowa. And this year, we printed out these scorecards, but we left the numbers blank. And in our presentation, we had a multiple choice. So everyone in the room, which is well attended by legislators, farmers, and advocates alike, we all come together. And we did this interactive multiple choice, and people were, yelling out the answers, and then they would fill it in when we revealed the answer. And that was really impactful. We had some really good conversations. We had like some people, heckling, it was a really good time. And I think we will do that again, but there was just a lot, it really sparked, audible gasps. Maybe that like 0.4% number. There were like people like audibly, like visibly upset. So it was just a really powerful exercise that we did together. And next slide, you can see where we also print these out and bring them to our annual Day on the Hill. So every single year we go down to the Capitol, we bring a big group of people. We hand these to legislators. We talk to legislators, and this is a really easy way to just get that data and that storytelling right into their hands. So it's been really great. Next slide. Okay, so those are the two main ways: is tracking our impact and tracking the system that we're in. But I just want to touch briefly on why it matters and how else we use this great data. It's been years and years and years of work to get to this point, to have this data, and you better believe that we're going to use it. We're going to use every little bit of it, all this hard work. So when we're talking about communicating complex systems like the food system, agriculture system, both stories and data, they have limits. So humans really are wired for stories. And, we connect with individual experiences. But we also experience something called scope insensitivity. So that means we don't naturally grasp the scale of something. So you hear about one farmer losing their land, and that feels really powerful. If you're hearing that hundreds are struggling with land access, or, this happened to hundreds of people, that doesn't feel hundreds of times more important, even though it should. But that's like a scope insensitivity. That's why storytelling is so important, and why we can use this data to kind of bring it down to focus in on a story and widen the lens again. So data has, the opposite challenge. It shows scale and trends, but on its own, it can kind of be a little boring. So we use them both together. Stories help people care, and data helps people understand the scale and the patterns, the trends. It helps people make those connections that they need. We are very aware of the siloed way that our food system has been approached in the past, and we're really working to break down those silos and show, our rural communities, our health, and our environment, all in our food system and what we eat, it's all connected. So I think this is storytelling using a bit of data really helps to narrate that story better than either can do alone. And go to the next slide. Okay, so finally, we also use all this great data year-round in our podcast, which is at the Iowa Farm Table. If you haven't checked that out, you should. Arlene, if you could find a link, that would be great. I just didn't put that in there. But that's a really fun podcast that we do about twice a month. They're about 15 minutes, and they're just like a deep dive into what's going on in our food system. Our podcast producer, Beth Hoffman, really appreciates that we have, reliable data that she can just grab and get these podcasts produced pretty quickly. We also use it in media pitching and media coverage. Every single time we're sending out press releases or, press pitches or story pitches to the media, we like to ground that in data too. And we need something to bite onto. What's the real story here? And of course, money. So we need money, and we use that data and all of our impact and collective data for grant reporting and grant writing and all of that really fun stuff that I can start to talk about on the next slide, which is not my specialty. If you have questions, we will do our best to try to answer. But this was going to be where Tommy was going to jump in. But next slide is, I'm positive that many of you have probably gone through like the gulag of applying for a USDA grant or, many other grants. I don't know if any other grants are, as much of a headache as USDA, but you've all put together grants. And so we rely really heavily on our evaluation plan to ensure that we are able to prove our impact and provide specific indicators, like the example here from the Regional Food System Partnership grant application. So it's really helpful for our grant writing team to just have that data ready to go, and we have reliable sections that and budgets we can just pull right into. Next slide. The flip side of that, if you get a grant, they want you to report on what you've done and at the end, or if you're at the end of your grant or every year, or if you're seeking more funding, they want to see the impact. So it's very, very helpful for reporting just to have all of these things ready to go. Again, I'm not I help a lot with the writing, being on the communications team, but funding is not my favorite. But I want to say thank you again to Arlene for the hard work and all the priority teams, and having this plug and play plan ready, for when I get a crazy idea and we're going to write a grant for it. It has been such a game changer. I only have one slide left, and it's just a picture. And this is our team that went down for our day on the Hill this year. It was a really good time. We were down in the rotunda on the first floor, passing out local food samples, talking to legislators, handing them those scorecards, and it's just a really, really nice day. And that is the end of my slide. I'll kick it back over to the team at MSU.
Thank you so much. Here, I'll stop the share for just a moment before we get into the group synthesis question. Let me turn my video back on. Oh my gosh, thank you so much to the team at Iowa Food Alliance. Wait, am I saying it right? Iowa Food Alliance, Food System Alliance.
Food System Coalition.
Food System Coalition. I don't know where I was coming up with that. Apologies. Yeah, just listening to your presentation, I cannot tell you how both inspired and validated I feel, because we have some similar things over here in Michigan, trying to figure some of this stuff out and just really storming through it. And I was like, there's got to be something wrong with me, but no, it just turns out this is like kind of a hairy process, and combing through everything, that's a really terrible metaphor, but trying to get through it just takes some time and some methodology. So it's really good to hear how you approached it. So thank you so much. And we'll say thank you to Tommy again too. Now we want to kind of open this up. We do have a little bit of time left here to get into some group synthesis. And I think, or maybe we'll pause for just some Q&A. I didn't see any questions coming in. Colleen, maybe, I don't know if you saw any questions. We do have some appreciation for you in the chat.
Yes, I saw appreciations for Arlene sharing some of the challenges of the work, and especially for the engagement activity that you shared, Mallory, with the legislators. I had a question, and I don't think I asked you this before, but Arlene, how much of your time is put to this evaluation work for the plan?
Yeah, so I guess it's how much time are they paying for and how much time are they getting are different questions.
Right.
No, so actually it's not a lot of my time actually that's going to this. And so I feel like there's more that we could do with the evaluation, but we have to fit the evaluation to the capacity that we have. So boy, right now I think I'm maybe 12. Okay, I don't work full time. But if I were to put it into a full-time equivalent, the first year when we were developing our plan, it would have been maybe about 20 or 25% of my time now of a full-time, and now it's about probably more like what 15%. So so yeah, it's not a lot of my time. But there also have been times when I'm probably giving more time to it than I'm getting paid to. It all kind of evens out in the end. But yeah, so I think if there was more time, if we had more time, um, I think our outcomes evaluation plan could be more robust. And maybe we would have figured out our process evaluation, like our record keeping maybe would have gotten figured out sooner, but maybe not. Some of that is just something you have to just kind of live through, and it takes the time that it takes.
I always say that, like, just like the growing season, like we have seasons of this work where, when we're gearing up for legislative session, I'm in your inbox a lot, so like we got to get this done. So yeah, it's very, I think, seasonal. And, when we have, big headlines or like things that are happening in the news, and I'm like, okay, I need some land access data like right now. I know where to turn. So that's been really great. One thing I did not mention, which I knew I was going to forget, but I didn't put it in the notes, was that like this plan really was written to be revisited every 2 to 3 years. So we want our teams to probably starting pretty soon, actually, each team will start relooking again at their actions and strategies. Hopefully we won't trigger a whole entire rewrite, but we do have that flexibility built in that we know this work is changing and evolving, and we want to remain flexible on that.
Thank you so much. That's a great point. I know I have another question to follow up on that, but before I ask it, do other folks have a question? And you're welcome to unmute yourself and come on screen if you want. Hey, Eva or Eva.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks. I'm Eva Ringstrom. I also do a lot of strategic learning and evaluation, Arlene. So thank you for sharing about your process and kind of the realities of it. It all is familiar. I'm based in Oregon, and work on one of my projects is a similar statewide plan sort of effort. I'm curious to know, I'm thinking about the balance you shared around like when participatory evaluation and when participation in evaluation design is like, what is the most valuable use of it and places for it? And also your comment about contribution and attribution. I'm curious to know, have you considered using any of the more kind of participatory outcome evaluation approaches that are becoming more widely known these days, like outcome harvesting, contribution analysis, most significant change? I wonder if something like that would be a great application of the kind of participatory aspect of this great group and coalition you have brought together, while thinking about the outcomes in a less segmented way, given the time issues to describe as well.
Oh yeah, so thanks. I don't have a lot of experience with like outcomes harvesting or like it's like I've read about them, but I haven't done them. So I feel like that's often like the big hurdle of like, do I want to try this new thing with these people when I haven't done it before? But I will say that these people would probably be the people to try a new thing with because, like I said, this coalition has really good trust, and I feel like this coalition has a real culture where like it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to like um you know try something out that maybe turned out didn't turn out how you thought it would. So that yeah, that's actually those are some really good suggestions that I probably need to spend more time thinking through. I think especially for the formative evaluation because I'm right now doing the survey and I've been thinking about like I don't know that we'll have the resources to do interviews again next year. And the survey, I don't think is really the kind of thing that you would do every year. So that might be like outcomes harvesting could be like a cool thing to
Yeah,
try
something like that
next
could
year.
be particularly because it sounds like you have some built-in in-person opportunities with the
We have some.
convenings that folks come to. So it can also be a great way for folks to connect. Anyway, I just wanted to share those as some of the connect the dots thoughts that you were sharing in your presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, and you had another question too. I did I address?
Lindsay maybe did.
Oh,
Nope.
okay.
Oh, I said I have another question, but I haven't asked it yet. I wanted to see if other folks have questions. Rich, I saw you unmuted. Did you have a question, Rich, or anyone else? Yeah, feel free to raise your hand or type it in the
No
chat.
question here.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Rich. Okay, we have a question from Dean. Would you comment, please, on who convened, who funds, who reviews the Iowa Food System Plan? And that is really similar to my question, which was kind of around the decision-making process. So when people are coming up with those outcomes originally, well, what was it? What was there a specific decision-making process in place?
Mallory, do you want to take the first shot at this question, or would you prefer that I?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I think Mallory had mentioned, or maybe it was Tommy, might have been Tommy, had mentioned that in 2022, when they first started this whole process, it was started by two individuals in our state, Camier and Cheyenne and Jan Libby, who had been working in this area for probably 20, 30, 40 years. They have a lot of experience. They originally received Kellogg funding, and there was a 2-year process where they had lots of focus groups. And I'm not sure if there were other ways of collecting input besides focus groups. Mallory, do you know?
I know it's on our website, but I do remember a lot of those listening sessions all around the state as
Yeah,
being
listening sessions.
very foundational. Yeah.
Yeah, and they had some that were in person. They had some that were online. So that's kind of how they were kind of coming up with the ideas for the plan. And then those funds came from the Kellogg Foundation. And then in terms of reviewing the food system plan, so when they were writing it, the writing took, I think, a lot longer than we originally thought it would. I think we originally thought that the plan would be written by the end of 2023. It didn't actually get released until, was it summer or fall of 2024?
July 1st.
July 1st. Okay. So I remember when I was first starting to write or work on the evaluation plan, the setting the table for All Iowans, what the final version wasn't out. So we were working off of a draft. A pretty good draft though. And I do remember there was some frustration with that because like some teams, well, each team wrote their own chapter. So like the chapters had really different styles. Like one was really, really academic and others were less academic. And some you could tell they had writers on their teams and some that maybe they weren't, writing was not their thing. And so I think there was a lot of work even just like trying to get the plan to all kind of sound similar. Like they wanted their own voices to come through, but it also is like this academic one sounds really, really different than the other ones. And so they tried to like bring it down a little bit. So in terms of the writing, and I don't know, Dean, was there more that you wanted to know about the reviewing? I just wanted to know. Is
I think one of the questions, or maybe that might refer to, you mentioned that you've built in a review process every like 2 to 3 years or so.
yeah.
And maybe Jean's asking who's reviewing at that
Okay.
stage, if there are going to be changes. And I think you
I
kind of,
do think, I don't know if we might have failed really to like stress this, but each of our chapters, each of our priority teams does have leadership. So it's, usually organization, like people from organizations that are working in that area. They do get a stipend, so it's, they're kind of contracted to do that work. So they're in charge of, convening their team, and kind of getting consensus on changes and, this work that goes forward and reviewing and deciding what's still relevant and what isn't.
thank you. Yeah, I think I heard you say that. And then just a note on the comments, and I was going to make a comment on this too, the time shift of how you think it's going to take a year and it ends up taking 2 years. And I will just say, I do remember talking with Jan Libby a few years ago, just encouraging her, saying like, take the time you actually need to do it, because, it took us, we started right before the pandemic. And so obviously we actually ended up getting the luxury of getting to slow down quite a bit, even though it was really challenging, of course. But so we had a lot of like very nuanced participation in our plan as well. So yep, and Jeff says you'll go farther if you go slower together. Okay, so I do, folks, if you have more questions, feel free to put those in the chat. And then Rich is adding a little more historical context there.
There is one more follow-up from
yes.
Dean there.
Yes, that is a good question. So does the plan report to the state now?
Oh, it does not. So the coalition, there are some state agencies participating in the coalition, but they were not the state was not the driver of this. And so no, we don't report to the state. And actually to bring in Rich's comment, so in 2011, Iowa, the state of Iowa mandated writing the food and farm plan, which Rich led that process. And we came up with a plan. But then it felt, I think to some, it felt kind of like the plan didn't get maybe as much attention once it was written as we were hoping it would, or like building up the coalition to then implement that plan just seemed like it didn't happen maybe to the extent we wanted it to. So I think my impression was that this time around, they didn't want it to be a state-driven plan because they were afraid that, like, let's say we have a changeover in leadership at the state level, then it may not receive the resources or the attention that we were hoping it would have. And so this time around, I think it really was kind of more grassroots rather than state driven.
Yep. We hear you on that. Okay, so we don't have a ton of time left, but I did want to put this group synthesis question out, and this is something we could put out to the listserv too, just to see what folks say. But we'll start it here. I'm gonna put it in the chat rather than open the screen again. We'll just put this out there. I think we can follow up too on the listserv, but if folks want to think about this for a minute, I'm gonna I'll read the question. The question is, hey, going back to that first slide that Tommy shared, that question of like, what if we were, producing, more of the food that was, or, consuming more of the food that was grown here in Iowa. And here's the question, how do we know? What is the percentage that we're eating? We've asked this in Michigan too. And so just as a group synthesis, how are folks approaching that? That's one thing that a lot of us have struggled to get to an answer about because it's so complicated. And I'll just scroll back up in the notes too and pop in. Tommy actually made a suggestion of a link, a resource I'm not familiar with. I'll just put this down here. So we want to make sure we do have a moment to just share with you what's next. So let me put oops, sorry. But yeah, is anyone, while we're pulling this together, does anyone know of any resources? Are you approaching that? Are you asking that question in your state? here's what Tommy shared. Local food counts. So this is from New England. It looks like a resource from New England. So maybe that's something we can follow up on. Colleen, we can learn a little bit more about that and see. I'll stop rambling. Is there anybody who is looking at that question? How much local food are folks consuming or sourcing, or what is the percentage that's grown in your state or region that stays in your region? Jeff?
Yeah, in Illinois, the number that always gets kicked around is that Illinois imports 95% of its food. And then sometimes it's like maybe like 96, 94. But then when the pressure comes to answer where that number's from, everyone's like, I thought you said that. No, I thought you said that. And in the end, what I just learned recently is that might actually be coming from the 2000, I think it was 11 Illinois Food Farms and Jobs report. And I think the actual figure was put together by Ken Meter. And Ken Meter is a person who I generally trust for information and data, all kind of things. And what's bothering me right now is that, like, if I'd just done the thing that I was wanting to do, which was contact him, because I talk to him kind of often. If I just ask him, where'd you get that number from? I could get an answer. So maybe I should just do my homework and get back to y'all about what he says, because everyone's pointing at him now, and I want to find out where he got that number from.
Ken better watch out.
Yeah, well, I would love to hear how that conversation goes. And like, I think it's like, okay, there's a similar story, like Arlene said, in Iowa, where everyone's like 90%. It's like, we don't doubt it, but we can't verify it and we can't track it. So we want, if we want to set a good, solid, procurement goal, we need to have a baseline that we can track. So does anyone have like advice of how do you track this? Easily?
Makala says that there might be some information in that report, that 2011 report that Jeff was talking about, and that there's some info on how the number was calculated in the report itself. So maybe we need to do a little digging into the appendix or whatever. I don't know, but I've seen that report. But yeah, back to your question. Do others have advice on that? Or you have the same question? We had the same thing too. There was like except for ours was like the value of $1, like the value of a local food dollar, and it kept circling back to like this one report that didn't have a source. But now there's a new food calculator, local value of a local food calculator that's out from our friends out in Colorado.
Yeah, the local food economic multiplier effect is one of them on our scorecard that we all debated, like, which number do we want to use? Because there's the local food for schools number that's like higher. So, we kind of settled on like one of the lower ones, just, to be conservative. But that one was really fun at the local food policy summit, where, a trick question, all of, A, B, C, D, these are all correct. So that was really fun, and a good way to talk about, how not every dollar you spend is different, even if, a school spends a dollar differently than you do. So it was actually a really cool conversation.
That's great. All right. Any other advice or commiseration? Also welcome. Okay. Well, keep that coming. And we can, I like the idea of posting that question out to the listserv when we share the recording. Colleen, do you want to do our little final slide here? We'll give everybody a heads up. We have got lots of things planned.
Our calendar is filling up, but thanks again to Arlene and Mallory and Tommy for a really great presentation. A lot of it resonated from my experience over all of the years of good food charters here in Michigan from the 2010 to the 2022. So I'm sure we could talk lots more, and hoping you can all stay engaged in the national community of practice activities going forward too, because I'm sure some of these evaluation points will continue to come up. So on that note, you will see everyone on this meeting, a evaluation survey for this meeting coming to your email straight after this meeting. So we would love it if you complete that as soon as possible. And we do have some upcoming sessions that we wanted to let you know about. So on Thursday, May 28th, we just scheduled for a connection session that will focus on collective impact with some Illinois partners from Central Illinois who are interested in engaging in a conversation around that topic. June is still to be determined. And Lindsay, I was remembering too, we have an ongoing conversation with food policy networks about potentially doing a session focused on a rural multi-county plan in Colorado. So that may be a June session or that may come later, but that's one that's in progress. So stay tuned on what we've got coming for June, but we have some other ideas if that one doesn't work out for that time. And then in August, on the 27th, we have another learning session with a spotlight on Mississippi with the Center for Mississippi Food Systems and a few leaders from that work that we're excited to hear from. And a date to be determined in October will focus on Hawaii with the Ke'omao Center for Sustainable Island Food Systems at the University of Hawaii and some of the work they're leading there. So I'm really excited about how the geographic shape of these conversations are working out. Really representative of the different kinds of work that are happening all across the country and excited to learn more. So we'll keep you posted as our calendar continues to fill out, but we wanted to share these dates that we have set so far so you can save the date, and we'll be sure to send this calendar in a follow-up email to you all through the listserv too.
Yep. And I put it in the chat, but I saw Leah was on, and I know I have a schedule to follow up. I think next week my calendar is going to tell me to follow back up with you about another session that we've been thinking about for a while. So hopefully we'll keep it going. I know we will keep it going. Plenty to talk about. I think we can call it here. We'll say thank you. We can hang out. I'll just end the share, but we can hang out for a little bit and see if anybody else has anything you want to share, any resources you want to share, or we can kind of keep the conversation going about how we approach local food, measuring the, I guess, how much we're eating.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, sincere thank you. I was telling Colleen in a text message that I would like for our whole staff to get a chance to hear your presentation because it was really, really helpful and clear.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
This is a lot to cram in to 30 minutes, so 40 minutes.
Excellent.
Arlene, you did a great job.
As did you, Mallory.
I'm going to hit stop on the recording.